Have you ever thought about buying an Airbnb? Maybe you watch those TikTok videos, you're trying to figure out if there's really something there, if it's really a good investment, or if there's just a bunch of hype. I've been doing real estate investing since I was in high school. I was also an investor in Airbnb prior to them going public. I wish I could say it was an early investor. I was actually a growth stage investor in Airbnb, but huge fan, very early user on the platform. And I've traveled all over the world and stayed in all kinds of amazing Airbnbs and have long been a huge fan. I mean, I think the thing for me that's really interesting about Airbnb is that a lot of people thought oh, well, really it's really hurt the hotel industry or what have you, or that's really their competition. But in my mind, Airbnb has just grown the category, because the thing that's the most compelling to me about Airbnb is two things. One, it reduces the cost of travel significantly. And there's been a lot of chatter out there that oh, well, Airbnbs aren't so great because they make you do all these chores and the prices have gone up, and staying at a hotel is so much better. And look, I stay in hotels a lot because I travel for work. And when you're traveling for work, hotels are great. You walk in, you know what you're gonna get, everything's clean, everything's orderly. You don't need a kitchen, you don't need crazy fancy things, right? You don't care about that, right? You need a place to work and sleep, and that's it, right? And for that, hotels are excellent. And personally, I'm a huge fan of being loyal to one hotel because I get all kinds of perks. So right now I'm super loyal to Hyatt, and I would say probably 75-80% of the time, because I have the highest tier status with Hyatt, I get upgraded to suites. They give me all sorts of fun things. That's great, right? For hotels. But at the same time, I still book Airbnbs all the time for personal travel. And the reason for that is because if you compare what I can get from a hotel and what I can get from Airbnb, I would be paying 2 to 3 times the price to get the equivalent at a hotel as I can with an Airbnb. Airbnbs just flat out are cheaper. And the other thing is, you get these experiences that you just couldn't get any other way. Or you'd have to pay an insane amount of money at a hotel. So for an example, I stayed at this amazing little Airbnb in Italy that was right on the ocean. And it was an amazing property. I looked at hotels that offered the same thing, and it was it had to be 2 to 4 times as expensive to get anything even comparable. So, pros and cons. Anyways, I say all of that not just to talk about why I think Airbnb is great and why Airbnbs in general are great relative to hotels, but I say it because I think it's important if you're going to invest in Airbnbs to understand that those are your 2 key drivers as to why you should get an Airbnb, because that's why people are going to stay in your Airbnb. They're going to do it because either it gives them an experience that they just frankly cannot get, or they cannot afford to get any other way at hotels, for example. Or because they're looking for something that is very low cost. And then you have to decide where you want to spend your time and energy doing those types of Airbnbs. This highlights 2 properties that I own in Mexico, which is where I currently am. I own 2 properties. And if you want to learn more about that, I've got a video coming out where I talk about my experience buying properties in Mexico, why I ended up with 2, I didn't mean to, but why I ended up that way. My 2 properties are pretty different. One is a 2-story penthouse on a beautiful beach that is somewhat secluded. There's only a handful of other buildings on the beach. And it has incredibly soft sand, and then is surrounded by Mexican jungle on the other sides of the condo. But it's also outside of town, so it's a little bit of a drive, which is a pro and con, in that it's a little more quiet, a little slower pace, but you do have to drive about 15-20 minutes to get into town where all the good restaurants and stuff are. The other condo that I owned up until today when I sold it is right in the center of town. It's a brand new development. It kind of feels like a hotel. And there are a whole bunch of other units in the building that look exactly like mine. I mean, not exactly, but pretty similar. And so what I found is when I was renting it, I had 2 different kinds of experiences going on, right? On the one hand, my property that's a little more out of town, it's a very unique property. There's no other properties quite like it that have the same characteristics that it has, or very, very few. And so because of that, I'm able to charge more per night and create a very unique experience for my guests that would cost them probably like 4 to 5 times that same price if they were to stay in a hotel just down the road. My other property, though, feels very much like a hotel. And so there's a lot of competition. And what I found is, I had a choice. I could either keep it rented consistently at a lower price because I was competing with so many other hotels in the area, so many other properties within my own building that looked exactly the same. Or I could raise my price and have higher vacancy, but more margin. Ultimately, what I decided to do is that it was better just to, it's better to get $175 a night than zero, was kind of my thought process. And so I used some pricing engines to help me lock that in. Ultimately, I decided to sell it in part because they're building a new building next door to my building, and the original plans were for it to be about the same size. But they didn't build the exact same size. They ended up doubling it. And the properties that they're putting in are 2 and 3 bedroom units. Mine's a 2-bedroom, but it's a very large 2-bedroom. And there are very few large 2-bedroom units in the current building, but in the new one going in, there's a ton. And so I just felt like I'm already facing a bunch of competition. It's just going to get even worse. Property values have gone like through the roof in Puerto Vallarta. Now's a great time to sell and get out, because I didn't want to be in a commoditized game. And I think that is like one of the big key things about Airbnbs, is that if you get into it and you're just going to buy some random property that's going to be similar to a lot of others, it's going to be really hard because you're ultimately going to be competing on price. You never want to be competing on price. Companies that compete on price, products that compete on price, they're called commodities, right? They don't really have anything that makes them special, and so the only thing that they can do really is compete on price. And as more and more people buy units, right, you have more product coming into the market, and that pushes downward on price, which squeezes your margin. When everybody talks about the Airbnb apocalypse, right, they're like, oh no, like the Airbnb apocalypse. What they're really referring to, in my opinion, is all of this glut of properties where people are like, oh, it's super easy to make money. All I have to do is buy a property and list it on Airbnb and the money comes rolling in. And that was definitely true like I don't know, 4 years ago. But what's quickly become the case is that as more people have entered the industry, you saw this rise in people making a ton of money in Airbnbs as everybody started going on vacation, work from home, et cetera, et cetera. But as that started to taper back, people are going back to the office, people have spent their stimulus checks, et cetera. They no longer have as much money. You're starting to see a lot of downward pressure on pricing for Airbnbs that are really commoditized. Now, the thing that's interesting, my other property that's more unique, I haven't seen very much downward pressure on it. And my other property that I sold, I was able to keep it pretty well rented, but my rates on a comparative basis to my competition were relatively low in order to achieve that occupancy rate. My other property, that's not the case because there really are no other options quite like it down there. And what that does is allows me to charge a higher rate for it, and that rate gives me margin that I can use to do all kinds of really fun marketing things. So, for example, I could run ads. I provide a very unique experience for my guests when they come, so they end up giving me good reviews and talking about how special the property is and how it blew their mind and blew away their expectations, right? All of those things that give me an edge relative to the other Airbnbs. One of the things that I love about Airbnb is that cap rate perspective, you can make a lot more money. So I've done a lot of real estate investing where I own a property and I rent it out to renters on a long-term basis, and you end up getting cap rates, they bounce around between high single digits to low to mid double digits, right? With Airbnbs, you can get a lot higher rates. Now, what's a cap rate? A cap rate is simply the rental income that comes in every year divided by the price of the property. So if you spend $100,000 on a property and you generate $10,000 annually in gross rents, then your cap rate's about 10%. And at Airbnb, depending on the property, you could be generating as much as you generate in 1 year in a month. And so the cap rates can be a lot higher. The flip side is you have a lot more wear and tear on the properties, and you have a lot more complaints and other issues that arise. So for example, like, if I have a long-term renter in my property, like, I'm going to assume that they're going to take care of a lot of things, just like generally speaking. But if I have somebody that's staying in my Airbnb and things aren't like absolutely perfect, like, they're going to complain, right? And they're going to expect me to come in and make it right and fix it. And so that just creates a lot more work. Now you can outsource that and you can have an agency do it, but that is going to cost you anywhere from like 20 to 30% of your gross receipts. And so it can be costly. It's still doable, but that can be a lot of your actual margin going out the door. Because that's the other thing is, like, when you take into consideration, like, you're going to have higher utility expenses, you're going to have more wear and tear, so that's more maintenance expenses. You have to actually stock the Airbnb. And if you go cheap, then that means you got to replace stuff more often. And if you go more expensive, well, then that's more upfront investment. So that's challenging. And so when you like take out all those things and then you take out another 20%, there's just not a lot left after that. So just something to like keep in mind if you're going to do these things. Now, if you get scale, you add more and more units into your portfolio, then you can start to get some scale and you can start hiring people to manage those things for you and cut your cost below that 20% management rate, but it's still kind of challenging. The other thing is that if you're going to manage it yourself, then it can be a little bit stressful. So for example, this one time I had this guest. They came in and they left the place a disaster. But the worst thing they did was that they left a bunch of meat in the trash and they didn't take the trash out. Now I tell my guests that, like, please take the trash out, like, as you leave. There's like some garbage cans in the hallway that get emptied every day, so you can just grab the bags, drop them in there. Like, I try to keep like my checklist of things that they need to do on their way out to a bare minimum, but I do ask them to do that because it took my cleaning staff like a couple days to get in to clean the property. And during that time, the air conditioning units were left off and the garbage cans became like this like breeding ground for flies and bugs. So my next guests come in and they're like, there are a lot of flies and we keep killing flies. And I'm like, that's weird. Maybe it's because of the construction next door that's going on. I don't know. But then it got worse and worse and worse. And like, I felt so bad. I ended up like refunding some of their money and like helping them find another place. It was like a total disaster and super stressful. And even if I had like an agency that was kind of managing it for me, like, I still would have had to be engaged with that and like approve it and like been stressed out about that. And so if you're not the kind of person that can handle that kind of stress of like dealing with a retail environment, I don't know if like managing and owning Airbnbs is really for you. Like, you'd probably be better off to just have long-term renters that you don't have to worry about quite as much. The other thing that you have to worry about, right, is even if you have an agency, like, you're constantly worrying about getting good reviews, ensuring the place is really clean, like making sure that your staff is really helpful and happy and that they show up and get their job done and that they do it right. Invariably, like, you have to replace things that get broken, and sometimes that's stressful because, like, what happens if like your fridge breaks, right? You have a guest coming in and they anticipate like a fridge that works, and so you might be scrambling to get that fridge replaced or fixed within a relatively short time period. So there's all this like juggling back and forth and so forth. Ultimately, I kind of like it. I think it's kind of fun to create great experiences for people and try to be a really responsive host. But it can be stressful, and so that is something to take into consideration. I think at the end of the day, if you're going to do it, you just need to approach it as though it is a business. And so all of the same principles that apply as being an investor and investing in businesses are really important to keep in mind when you have an Airbnb. Like, you wouldn't want to start a company that was a commoditized business, right? You want to have something that's special, that has a product that's unique in the market. And you should be thinking about it in the same way with your Airbnb. Anyways, I hope this is helpful in terms of learning about my opinion on Airbnbs. I think they're great. I think they're fun. It's not where I plan to make the bulk of my income going forward, but it is a fun place to invest. And the perk that I love the most is now I own this like really fun asset, right, that generates income, and I can go on trips to work on it and enjoy it and have some vacation time while still making it a business expense and a valuable asset that hopefully will return beyond just the rental income that comes in. Anyways, let me know, what do you think of this video? Have you invested in Airbnbs? What do you think of the pros and cons? Any that I missed? What are some of the pros that you love as being an Airbnb investor? Or what questions do you have about what the process has been like for me? Thanks for watching. If this was helpful, please like and subscribe. It really helps the channel, and thanks for watching.